You cannot sell to anybody who's not a lawyer. So that limits the sophistication of your competition, which is good and bad, but also limits your enterprise value and your ability to bring in folks who are true business people to help you run the business. And then the law doesn't have recurring revenue. There's very few areas of the law. If you're going to go do a family divorce or personal injury or even transactional stuff, it's pretty one-time.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to the Small Business Mentor podcast, where we shine a light on the black holes of business growth with your host, Alan Pence. In each episode, we explore the leaps and bounds entrepreneurs make as they push their businesses beyond the 1 million mark into the realm of professional sustainable growth. Stay with us as we navigate the journey from brute force to finesse.
So today on the podcast, we have a very special guest, Eric Pacifici, which I completely mispronounced when I first met him. And he is a partner with the SMB Law Group that specializes in pretty much small business M&A.
That's the vast majority of what we do. We are transitioning slowly to a full service law firm to be able to support anything that folks need in business. The business law firm is the new nickname, but primarily about 90% of our clients right now are buying small businesses, sub $15 million enterprise value, some transactions up to 25, 50 million, but largely kind of your premium Main Street, lower middle market focused clients.
So is this mostly like a searcher deal?
It's a lot of self-funded searchers. Yep. If you're familiar with that discipline, which is an individual who goes and buys a business, fancy term that the business schools have given these guys and gals, but largely it's just a person who wants to take their own capital, buy a business, which is not a new discipline. I think the newness of it is the people who are doing it, leaving Wharton and Stanford and Chicago and buying a tree trimming business in Eastern Tennessee is a little bit unusual. But we have all kinds of clients, smaller private equity funds, strategics, people who are buying Main Street businesses.
All right. So give me a little sense of the market these days. I mean, what you're hearing in the larger PE kind of VC market is transactions are picking up again, but, a lot of stuff is frozen in place and valuations haven't kind of evened out with the rise in interest rates. So what's happening in the lower market?
We did about 95 closed transactions last year, somewhere in that neighborhood, 93, I don't know, somewhere in that range, for just shy of $1 billion in enterprise value. So we see a lot of anecdotes. It's not necessarily reflective of the whole small business marketplace. I can tell you what I'm seeing, and I can tell you what the data looks like, but it's very hot. We had a slowdown in the summertime. I think you got a lot of small business owners that are trying to read political tea leaves in a year like this, trying to decide, do I want to hold on through another administration? You've got a Democrat president right now. You've got the possibility of a Republican administration coming in. People feel differently about those things. So there's a lot of tea leaf reading going on. We saw valuations come down when we launched the firm 2 years ago. We were looking at a lot of 4.5, 5 times multiples. Now you're seeing a lot of 3s and sub 4 multiples. So sellers have adjusted. Also, the way with which the purchase price is being paid is changing. The institutions are not. Interest rates 2 years ago, you'd buy a business at 5.5%. Now you're buying it at 10.5%. And so some folks still want the same price, but they cannot get it in the same terms. So they've got to be more flexible in terms of putting up seller financing, having interest-only payments or delays in payments, standby notes, forgiveness, a lot of contingent payments based on performance of the business going forward. So we're seeing a little bit of a slowdown in the summertime, but a really big explosion in the last 60 days of transactions that are now coming to life. So it'll be interesting to see what the second half of the year in an election year will look like. So maybe we'll check back in 6 months and give you an update.
So are you seeing a change in the profile of the seller as well? Is it, I imagine in 21, if you were thinking about getting out at all, it's a bonanza, I'm getting big multiple, blah, blah, blah. Is it more like people who really need to sell at this point? Is that sort of the older retirement or disability or death or those kinds of things? Is that rising as a percentage?
The vast majority of sellers are older. If you're selling a business, most of the businesses that we do, I call it blue chip entrepreneurship through acquisition because it's really business buying has existed. A guy or a gal goes out and buys a $300K profit restaurant. That's not really what we do. Most of our clients are looking for at least $750K in earnings, up to $1.5 million. Once you go north of $2 million, you're in private equity territory. So self-funded searches really aren't in that space. Micro PE funds are. When you got a business that's producing 750K to $1.5 million in earnings consistently year in, year out with a long-term reputation and standing in the community, there's got to be a good reason for you to sell that business. You don't just get bored of making $1 million a year in your 40s. It's hard, right? It's incredibly difficult. Entrepreneurship and running a small business on Main Street is really challenging for everybody. But the cast type of the seller has almost always been 60 plus years old, and that hasn't really changed.
Yeah, I mean, especially now, I would think you got a business producing $1 million in cash flow, profits, whatever, and you're going to get 3 to 4 times that. There's no alternative investment that even approaches that with any consistency outside of that. So you really have to want to sell. I mean, you got to have a motivating reason.
For the buyer, right? If you think about the disparate position between the buy side and the sell side, this is why entrepreneurship through acquisition is so attractive, is the idea that I'm going to go buy $1 million in earnings for $2 million to $4 million, spend a couple years not screwing it up, pay the debt off, and then I'm going to have $1 million cash flowing asset. I mean, I'm not a numbers guy. I'm an attorney. I get myself in trouble anytime I try to talk about return on investment or MOIC or IRR or whatever. But you don't have to be a smart man to know if you buy $1 million in earnings for $2 to $4 million and don't screw it up, which is a big qualification there, qualifier. That's going to be a pretty life-changing investment. But on the sell side, the seller's going, wait a second, I'm going to sell my business that's making $1 million a year for $2 million to $4 million. I'll just keep running it. I'll run it for a few more years and have the same amount of money. So when they do ultimately sell, it's for a pretty good reason. You've got a generation in the baby boomers that are aging in huge numbers. I think the youngest baby boomer right now is around 70. And that's going to push a lot of them to start moving those assets. Folks that are in their 40s and 50s that sell for a variety of reasons, and you always have to look really closely at that. You don't buy a business without a non-compete in place, but non-competition clauses are sometimes difficult to enforce. You get a 42-year-old seller who pushes on the non-compete and wants 3 years instead of 5, you start asking some serious questions. So it's an interesting thing.
Yeah, the other thing I like about that market, it's a lot of SBA financing. I'm assuming that your deals are largely funded by. So that's just putting a cap on prices. I mean, at least cash at close. So you just can't go too far north of that. And it has to be financed by a bank.
It does. Yeah, it's actually a really beautiful part of the marketplace. I think it's fascinating once you understand that in the absence of the SBA, the Small Business Administration, supporting through government guarantees these 7(a) loans, which the loans come from private institutions. They come from the bank. But as long as the bank does certain things in qualifying the 7(a) debt, then the bank gets a guarantee on the debt. If the buyer defaults, then they can turn around to the government and say, hey, I did all the right things, reimburse me for this default. So really nice product, 75% of it. Yeah, but there'll be a down payment of at least 10% usually. And so usually they're not financing much more than that. So it's a really good product for a bank. If you think about it, you get pretty healthy fees off of it, and you could do a lot with the paper. Assuming you get the SOPs right, the SBA SOPs, which are a challenging set of rules. But you're right, it tethers the marketplace. And now if you own a business that does less than $2 million in earnings, and if the SBA didn't exist, what would you be able to do with that business? You'd be selling it like they do in Canada and other places on a large promissory note. So you'd be the bank. And when you do that, you get much less favorable terms. So the SBA comes along and turns these transactions into largely cash-based transactions, but then you got to play by the SBA's rules. Most SBA lenders, the SBA itself will not allow you to finance a transaction unless it has a debt service coverage ratio of at least 1 1/8, but that's very skinny. Most banks are going to be at least 1 1/4, but a lot of the great banks are 1.5. And then you have at these really good SBA lenders, really sophisticated, experienced BDOs. There's a handful of them that do a lot of acquisition financing. They see a lot of small businesses. They're very smart. And they're really helping buyers kind of make sure there are guardrails in place. And I can give your listeners, if they're interested, the list of those people. But it's great. If you're a first-time buyer, you get to go to an institution, you get to play by the SBA rules, and you get to get the support of somebody who's seen tens of thousands of small businesses in their career tell you whether or not it's a bankable transaction. And then they also look at you, Alan, and they go, also, Alan, looking at your background, I don't think you're up for it, or I do. And if they say, hey, Alan, like you can't run this electrical contracting firm, you're going to screw it up, you should probably take that advice seriously.
So I interviewed Clint DeFiore, who's broker in the space. His take is most of these businesses are not transactable. So what would your take on what percentage of businesses out there can actually transact in a like debt bank finance, not seller finance transaction?
I couldn't even guess at a number, but there is some truth to it. Every time I say, hey, there's $7 trillion worth of baby boomer businesses that need to be sold, that's a line from Walker Dybel's book, Buy Then Build, if you're familiar. The pushback is, yeah, 7 trillion, but how much of them are transferable? That's a great question. But to me, it kind of misses the forest from the trees, right? Because just because a business itself is not transferable doesn't mean there isn't value there that's going to go somewhere. If it's a local HVAC business, and let's say they are a terrible business. They've got whatever key man risk, customer concentration. It's not very profitable, whatever. They still have customers, right? And ultimately, when they get to the end of that line for that business, whether it's being sold or closing, whatever, those customers that it was servicing are going to go somewhere. And so I do think that there is a generational business opportunity that goes well beyond buying businesses. So what percentage are actually transferable? I don't know, but I do think that if you're a young, hardworking, industrious, capable person, this is a great time to be out in the marketplace trying to build a business, which I would qualify saying great time by saying entrepreneurship and business buying and building is always going to be enormously difficult no matter what the circumstances are, but you certainly have a little bit of a better, I think, period of time coming up to get into it.
I think the percentages change a lot based on EBITDA. So if you're down at those low SDE numbers in the mid 100,000s, it's 10% maybe. But once you get up to $1 million and it's not just SDE, I think you're talking a much bigger percentage are transfer.
Yeah. If I were to go buy a business tomorrow, there's definitely different arguments for buy small versus buy big. You buy small, you're buying a glorified job and you're operating. But you buy big, maybe you're managing to some extent. It's more of an enterprise. But buy a small business south of 350 in advertised earnings is a universe with which I am not familiar, nor would I encourage anybody to get out there and do that.
Actually, I'm in the middle of some talks about some of these. And what I think it requires is creative deal making and a seller that's been beat up. So these sellers, when they come to the market, they think they have a number based on usually nothing. And it's just a number they want. And then it just takes a period of time and how bad it gets for them, like how tired they get. And then eventually they'll do a deal where it's a percentage of profits going forward or something where they finance it essentially. So I think those are great. Once you have a business, I think it's worth having discussions with a bunch of different sellers like that, but just realize like it's going to take that. You're talking like an 18 to 24 month period where they've got to come to the reality of the market. And you're going to talk to their brother who's a lawyer who does like real estate deals, and he's going to try to tell you what the value of the company.
It's funny. I literally just got off a call, Alan, with a younger guy, and he said, hey, a family friend's trying to sell a business, does about 400K in earnings, but he wants 2 million for it. A younger guy said, we got into the finances and we talked to him about this and that. He says, I don't care. I want 2 million. And the buyer's trying to make it make sense in his mind. And I'm trying to explain what you just said. It's off market, so there's no broker involved. And I'm saying to him, number one, once you diligence that business financially, you look at the quality of earnings. 400 is not going to magically become 600, probably going to become 350, 300, 250, maybe less. So you've got an individual who's already indicating that they're not going to be flexible on things. You haven't had a chance to look at the books. This person is asking for a valuation that they're just not going to get in the marketplace. It's going to take you an enormously long time for them to warm up to the idea that it's not saleable. The guy's 88 years old. He doesn't even know what Excel is. So you're going to get in there, try to financially diligence this business. It's going to be a pain in the ass. Meanwhile, you could have been out in the marketplace diligencing and looking at other opportunities.
I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but I do think that once you have a business, always keep in mind, to your point, the actual EBITDA or whatever SDA that's on offer in a business where you're not already operating a business like that is always going to go down in diligence, not up. The only way it's going to go up is if you already have a business doing that and you're just cutting out some cost, or you have some proprietary way of doing something you can sell better. So maybe you can make the EBITDA number go up once you own it, but very rarely without a lot of operational work.
Probably a great segue into talking more about operating a business versus buying, but also once you acquire the business, not only is the advertised earnings going to probably be less once you dig in, but then you buy the business and you almost always have margin compression and a J curve when you buy a business before you get things kind of figured out takes when in that interim period, now you have even more of a fall away of earnings. And if you're buying at 5 times earnings or the high end of the SBA, it could end up being stressful, to put it as nicely as possible. Yeah.
And just to be clear, I mean, this is a risky business, taking on debt. A lot of times you're going to leverage your house. So it's a risky business, not to be taken lightly.
Entrepreneurship generally is risky. I mean, talk about starting a business. I think your failure rate is much, much higher, but the magnitude of what that failure does to your life is not the same as if you go out and you personally guarantee 3-4 million bucks or more. And then you've got failure. I mean, that could take you decades to dig out of. So that buying a business is a great thing, and that you get a business that is already at one. But if you can't manage that thing, or if you buy too skinny or too ambitiously, you could end up in trouble. So
And one thing I always try to point out is the search movement kind of began as a funded search by investors. So that's where they derived from: Stanford, Harvard. And it feels like that movement, it still exists, I assume. But you got to buy a bigger business when you're talking about investors and blah, blah, blah. So like there, you weren't taking a lot of personal risk. I mean, maybe you put in some money, I don't know, but you got time and things like that. But that's where the whole ethos came from. Then it moved down market and it became SBA funded. And now we have a whole different risk profile. And so I think people didn't connect those two things and just didn't understand the differences. And I think largely the market feels like it's mostly the SBA funded. And so it's a far riskier proposition than it was before.
yeah, I mean, if you think about the profile of those two things, you're referring to traditional search, which was a concept that you've got to be an elite MBA to get traditional funding, right? There's a very small group of private equity funds that pretty much do all of the funding. They fund to very elitely educated individuals. And the economics there are, as the traditional searcher, you'll own between 8 to 24% of the business, depending on how it performs, but you can even be fired. So that's more of a glorified CEO role. You're also going to go buy a much larger business because you've got this table of institutional level investors that need more to make it work. And so you go buy a much bigger and typically better quality business. Great way to learn to be a CEO, great way to kind of cut your teeth in entrepreneurship, lower risk if you can meet the cast type. The problem is very few people are qualified to do that.
And also you're competing against major PE firms. I think it used to be they weren't in that middle part of the lower market or whatever. They were doing 5+ million EBITDA and there was something in there.
Self-funded search is the antithesis of that. It's open to pretty much anybody. Oftentimes you can get funded with very little of your own capital. You can find investors who will be in those deals with you, and you can buy everything. And to be clear, I love self-funded search. I have invested a tremendous amount of my own personal wealth into self-funded searchers. And the reason being is you've got tremendously successful and capable people that went to some of the best business schools, oftentimes went to some of the best business schools in the country, have served in the United States military oftentimes. So they're leaders of men and women. They've worked at Goldman Sachs or McKinsey or wherever, oftentimes, and not everybody. But then they want to go buy a tree trimming business in the middle of nowhere. And I'm sitting here going, you've been successful in everything you've done your entire life. You're much smarter and more capable than I am. And the investment terms that we touched on a little bit earlier on for self-funded search are tremendous. And so I've put a lot of money into those type of deals, in addition to being legal counsel for them, with the disclaimer for anybody who's listening being those investments are illiquid and they're speculative and they can go to zero. And that's why you trade for 2 to 4 times instead of, like in real estate, 20 to 25 times or whatever it is. But I'm a big believer in it, but certainly there's a lot of risks involved.
So we talked a little bit about multiples coming down a bit. Are you seeing other trends in the market? Like, I know businesses get hot in this space. So it's like HVAC. Are you seeing other kinds of trends happening in what people are looking for or actually buying?
Honestly, I don't have a trend. You're correct that for a long time, we saw a lot of HVAC businesses. People are buying anything and everything. There is an enormous amount of Main Street businesses, and there's a lot of really interesting ones too that you wouldn't even know. I think Brent B. Shore said, riches in the niche is like, you don't know it exists till you see it. And you're like, oh shit. And I won't give you any examples because I don't want to.
They bought the company that makes amusement park rides or something. I was like, of course you did. Right? That's the niche.
Yeah, stuff like that. I'll give you an example that because he talked about it publicly, but one of our clients bought a milk testing business in California. And so milk has to be tested before it goes into the market. This is a recession resistant business because no matter where the economy is, the government's going to require these farmers to have their milk tested. It's a very profitable business. And he happened to find a great opportunity in this space. And that's something I would have never thought about. And in fact, if I had thought of it or come across it, I would probably look at it myself and go, I'm not capable of running that. But here comes a young, smart, industrious, hardworking investment banker type who's been successful his whole life. And he's go run this dairy testing lab. And I'm sitting back going, take my money.
That's hilarious. Clint, I think, was advertising like a aquarium. There's all sorts of businesses out there.
There are. Some of them are truly terrible, though. A lot of them are truly terrible businesses. We joked prior to the call about the legal industry, and the legal industry being notoriously bad businesses due to ethics and a number of other things. But
yeah, so let's talk about it. All right. So what is it like running a law firm? So you were in big law, right? And then moved out and started this practice. So how is it as a business?
I have a lot of help in running this law firm. And it's interesting. The legal profession and I wrote an article was written in Forbes that referenced a piece that I wrote about the legal profession. The high level is, number one, ethically, vacation of your competition, which is good and bad, but also limits your enterprise value and your ability to bring in folks who are true business people to help you run the business. And then the law doesn't have recurring revenue. There's very few areas of the law. If you're going to go do a family divorce or personal injury or even transactional stuff, it's pretty one time. We may have some reoccurring clients that are going to buy businesses multiple times or have some reoccurring needs in their business, but very rare for a recurring business model, like contrasted to accounting. Accounting is a similar business in a number of ways, but you're going to do your tax returns every year. Your bookkeeping is month in, month out. That is recurring revenue. That's just creates a much stronger business environment than a project-based law firm. And then there's a lot of cultural expectations within the legal profession around giving equity to everybody. If somebody stays in your firm for more than 8 years, they're expecting you to give them piece of the business now. So not only is it a bad business in the first place, but you're also pressured due to marketplace to give a bunch of it away. And so the average law firm, like if you look at a really good example of a medium-sized law firm that started from scratch a decade ago and now has 50 to 100 lawyers, has really good reputation in a particular region or community, they'll be many partners deep. They're a mile wide and an inch deep. So the dude who built the business, built 100-person, 50 to 100-person business, has built very little enterprise value for themselves as compared to if you went out and built a similarly situated accounting firm or HVAC business.
In my understanding, so this is big law, talking to a litigator, he was like, he's a partner. So he gets like a third of what he bills. And then some percentage goes back to the overall partnership. And then some percentage covers overhead and all that kind of stuff. Is that sort of how it works out? Like the numbers, take your 50 to 100 person theoretical 10-year-old firm. Would that be kind of like partners are taking a third and like an associate would be getting a tenth or something like that? Or are there kind of broad numbers like that?
Associates are typically salary-based, salary plus bonus, and it really depends. But your general number of 30 to 40 cents on the dollar, if you're a partner at a medium-sized firm like that's not crazy. Which actually, in terms of businesses overall, isn't that bad, right? It's pretty decent margin, except that you then realize, okay, I kind of have a glorified job, right? Because I can't sell my interest in the business. Nobody will buy it. And also, if I stop working, I stop earning, which is not enterprise value. That's personal goodwill. It's not saleable asset. It's not a valuable thing. But 30 to 40 cents on the dollar makes sense when you consider most law firms have expensive leases. They've got expensive associates. They've got enormous amount of staff. Part of the opportunity that we're kind of seeing in the marketplace is to go away from the expensive lease. Most really good lawyers now don't even want to commute after remote work. After the pandemic, they're super excited about the idea of working for a firm that's not going to ask them to come to an office. So then they question, and your clients, I worked in these high-rise, beautiful, expensive high-rise offices for the better part of a decade. And you go in and you never see your colleagues except for in the kitchen. And your clients never come to the office. Never. I mean, over the course of 7 or 8 years in those firms, like a handful of times would you have clients in the office. So what are they there for? I don't know. We've been running our firm now for 2 years without an office and it has caused zero issues. If anything, it's given us the opportunity to recruit better than typical talent.
For an associate, do they need to bill what, 2, 3, 4 times their salary and benefits or something like that? Or is that something you can discuss? Just talking about our fictional middle market.
The typical target for an AmLaw 100 firm is that an associate will bill 2,000 hours in a year before they'll get their bonus. Now, what is the average within those firms? I would suspect median's probably a better way to gauge it, but the average is probably weighted down a little bit. Median's probably around that 2,000 or somewhere between 16 to 2,000, depending on the practice area and the environment and the year and the firm and how busy it is. Some folks can be way up over that $2,500, $2,600 a year. And when you look at that, you do some rough math on an associate who bills at a high rate. And my experience, I worked for some of the best law firms in the world. And like when I left Kirkland and Ellis as a 7th year, I think I was billing at like just shy of $1,500 an hour. So 2,000 hours or $1,500 is going to be way beyond what my very good salary plus bonus structure was. So if you get somebody billing at $2,000 an hour, you're going to make a lot of profit off of them in a good environment. But it is fixed overhead. We as a firm do not track hours. We're just not built that way. Lawyers don't want to track hours. Clients don't want to pay by the hour in most cases. So we don't really do hourly billing. So I haven't seen it from a business law firm operator perspective.
My sense is that the associates, they have to bill like 3 to 4 times what they get paid. And then the partners are getting that 30 to 40%. I guess that 30 to 40% includes the overall profit from across the firm that they're getting back. That profit from the associate, does that all roll up under the partner and then they get 30 to 40?
It does. Yeah. And they'll do a cut sheet and they'll take the profit at the end of the year. And they'll just decide in most firms, they've got maybe a committee or maybe a CFO and a managing partner. They'll decide the cut sheet based on a criteria that has quantitative and qualitative factors, and then they'll rank you. And each year it's a diplomatic headache for all the partners trying to get themselves into different places in the cut sheet.
I have a people-based business. I run a government consulting company. Rates are a lot lower, a lot steadier work. So we're like kind of a 50% margin business. And the great part about our business is you get so much more leverage from junior and mid-level people. And in law, what I've always found is like the partner really doesn't have that many people, like a few. But like in a consulting firm, you could have a project manager with 25 people. And like in these big law firms, I feel like it's 2 or 3 associates to a partner, if that.
It depends on the firm. It depends on the practice area. It depends on the need. But you're right. When I was doing M&A, myself as like a senior associate would be on a team with a junior partner for $1 billion deal. Myself, a junior partner, and a partner, and then maybe a junior associate. So a team of 4, 1 mid-level, 1 junior, 1 senior, 1 junior partner, 1 partner. So maybe 5 in a $2 billion transaction. And that's part of what was my issue when I was in big law with looking at the trajectory of it, deciding, okay, go do something more entrepreneurial myself and try to just break the mold. Is I worked for some of the very best lawyers in the country. One of the people I worked with was the guy I worked with the most was probably the best lawyer in the city of Dallas. And there's designations out there to support that. I'm not just making that up. But then another guy that I worked with a lot, who's 2 doors down, was one of 5-star individuals in private equity in the country, courted Chambers and Partners, only one in Texas. I mean, phenomenal. Did north of $5 billion transactions in 1 year a few years ago. Fantastically wealthy guy, fantastically impressive, charismatic guy. Liked him a lot. Everybody liked him. But he'd put in 12 hours on Sunday in his like early 60s. And I'm 30, I got kids. I'm like, I'm not going to do that. You're telling me if I crush it in this profession, I rise to the highest conceivable ranks, my reward is that?
I live outside of DC, so I have a ton of lawyer friends. Everybody works in the antitrust. But he always said that a law firm is like a pie eating contest where the reward for winning is more pie. You never get leverage. You just get more. You just have to keep doing more work.
There used to be a concept of a rainmaker and a guy who sits in the corner office and answers the phone. And these firms do not tolerate. The elite firms don't tolerate it anymore because there's such a numbers race. It's a very weird animal because in the law, one of the only industries I think that is these are private businesses and they choose to release numbers. So that tells you a lot about lawyers in the first place, but it also creates bad incentives because they are all competing tooth and nail for those profits per partner number, revenue per lawyer. And so if you got a dude who's sitting in the corner office answering the phone, oftentimes they will push that person out now, or they'll squeeze them in the economics based on their lack of actual productivity. I'm not saying every law firm is doing that, but that definitely is the trend that I saw in the Kirkland's, Gibsons.
It's almost like the US News and World Report, like college thing. Like it drives, because what's happening is they're saying your profit per partner or revenue, or whatever it is, they publish it. And then all the top candidates want to go to the place where they have the top profits per partner, right? But then that drives this, everybody's got to work more to keep that upping that ante.
Yeah, it's a signaling mechanism, and it'll be interesting to see what happens because I don't know how it can sustain. To be honest with you, Alan, the growth of the profits per partner, I could put it on the screen if your folks are interested. But the firm I left 2 years ago, Kirkland is number one, and they've passed Wachtell, and the profit per equity partner is $7.5 million per year. You're an equity partner. There's 505 of them. They're earning $7.5 million per year on average. This is what's passed through. This is what they take home.
So if you're saying that's 30%, 40% of billings.
Oh, it's enormous. But also one interesting point about this is that my understanding informally is that the ratio of profits per partner within Kirkland when I was there was 24-1. So the highest earning partner was earning 24 times the lowest earning partner. So you had many partners making 10, 15, $20 million a year in the law. And I would love to see, if you look at the growth of it.
That's pretty insane. Because you think about that, they're billing $18, $20 million a year.
Oh, enormous. Yeah. The SPAC boom. And if you look at the growth of these firms, and it would be interesting to see the profits per partner growth per year also, but I don't know how this continues to sustain. You've got lawyers that are making more than pro athletes.
Do they start going to transaction percentages, just like the investment bankers?
No, they bill hourly.
No, but I'm saying, would that be a way? So if you're doing M&A, maybe you start doing a mix of billable plus percentage of transaction or something like that.
Yeah, it could be.
So yeah, it'd be interesting to see, because it went exponential, right?
It's exponential. And so at some point, there's got to be a correction in the market. The point stands that I don't know how big law attorneys continue to out earn their profit per partner is at $7.7 million. It grew 10%. So it grew $700,000 per lawyer in a year. At some point, you've got these big institutional lawyers that are making more than Fortune 500 CEOs and professional athletes, and that's not going to be sustainable in large numbers, I don't think.
I put it into perplexity. They said between 18 and 23, profits per equity partner increased by 46% among the top 50 law firms, outpacing cumulative inflation, which was 19. So they're running at more than double the inflation. I'm sure that's an average, right? So some of them are going way up.
Thank you, ChatGPT, but ChatGPT just gave it to me by year, dating back to 2014. It was 3.3 million in 2014. I'll skip a few years. 5 million in 2018, 6.2 in 2021, and 2023 is 7.96 million. In 10 years, it's more than doubled.
Pretty soon, it'll be the entire economy.
Yeah, that's right. It's exactly. We won't even be paying tax anymore. We'll just be paying hourly rates to Kirkland and Simpson. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Fascinating. So we went deep on that, but I'm interested in a dysfunctional model that continues to perpetuate. And what's interesting is you don't see that in other countries, right? Because they don't have this restriction on buying law firms. So let's talk a little bit. So like you left, started this practice, and you guys have really hit it hot, right? And talk a little bit about that process. Was it largely driven by social media, or like how did the growth and success happen?
Honestly, probably entirely driven by social media. I mean, we have kind of a unique storm of being in a profession where folks are not. We have advertising and solicitation restrictions that make talking publicly hard in the first place. And then lawyers are notoriously risk averse. So the reason I started tweeting in what was called SMB Twitter at the time, and I did it anonymously, was largely to network in this entrepreneurship through acquisition community to try to make some investments like we talked about at the beginning. But I was realizing that there was no other legal contribution. Everybody's talking about M&A, and I'm like, you guys don't know what you're talking about or how to do an M&A deal. So I started tweeting and got a lot of traction really fast. And I thought we'd get a lot of really high quality competition, and we largely haven't. We've had a few individuals who've come forth that have switched practice areas and whatever else. And so I think we just found blue ocean interesting.
Was this originally your thesis, even when you left Big Law?
I didn't have a thesis, man. What I had was a lot of people coming to me saying, "Hey, I need a good lawyer for a 2, 4, 6, 8, $10 million M&A deal. Do you know anybody?"
And you were in M&A before.
Yeah, and I'm billing at $1,500 an hour at Kirkland. I can't do the deal, and I'm trying to find these are people I've built relationships with. I want to invest in whatever. I'm trying to find good lawyers for them, and I'm realizing, wow, it doesn't exist. But so we got to the point where we're going, we've got more deal. I'm giving away hundreds of thousands of dollars in deal fees a month to lawyers who don't want the work and aren't capable of handling it. Like, why don't we start something? But so it was magic in a bottle. I didn't have a grand plan. Still largely don't, other than you're just hit over the head every single day with people who are building and running great businesses and the way that they think about business and the way that they mitigate customer concentration and dependency on this and risk here and the way that they build teams and implement SOPs and all of the stuff that high quality businesses do. I have to look that in the face every single day as we build this business. And then you slowly just by dumb luck or inertia start kind of implementing and thinking about things the same way. And so incrementally over time, we've gotten better. And that's the question I now ask at the end of every meeting or recently is tell me concretely, guys, like what we've done today or are doing to become a better business, right? I don't want to just keep grinding in a glorified job like most lawyers do. I want to be slowly implementing things in our organization that builds a higher quality business. And so it's interesting the way that it's evolved. And it's only been 2 years. I mean, we really kicked off in earnest in July of 2022. And a lot of people like to remind me that's not a particularly long period of time. It feels like a lifetime.
It's a lot of deals, 95 deals last year. But have you sensed any, I mean, the X thing, SMB twit thing, is that still kind of producing the same stuff? I mean, a lot of people say it's changed. It's not quite as good as it used to be.
I try not to think too much about that, right? I mean, there's a lot of people that are watching. And the last thing that people that are watching want to hear you talking about or whining about is, oh, the quality of the conversation isn't as good anymore. Or, I hate Elon or politics or whatever. A lot of really high quality people that are wanting to read substantive, interesting, sometimes funny, enjoyable content. They're a business owner. They get out and they want to read about business operations. They want to read smart stuff. And then sometimes they want to laugh about stuff that's in our niche that's funny. That's they can identify with that maybe they try to show to their wife and their wife or husband that don't get it because they're not in the business. And so that's how I kind of think about social media. I'll always tweet, post, whatever, just because the benefits of doing it greatly outweigh the detriments of it. But yeah, I mean, it's ever evolving. It's an algorithm. These are platforms that are businesses trying to make money and they're doing different things. And
I think it's a great marketing thing when sharing a community like that. And I heard this thing one time that one of the reasons a lot of lawyers ran for political office was that they were banned from advertising.
it could be.
Yeah. So like back in the day, you would run for local office because that would get your name out there.
I've never heard that before. That doesn't make sense. But yeah, I can't go on. And I see lawyers do it all the time, first time lawyers. And I try not to be that guy, but I like want to shoot him a DM and be like, hey, just so you know, like you can't get on there and say, hey, I'm an M&A lawyer. Call me to your deal. Like you can't say that. If you do, you have to file with the state bar and pay $420 and they have to agree to it or whatever. But you can educate it. You can provide informational content all day long, so long as it's not designed to people write blogs and stuff all the time. So let's see how it's different. But yeah, and that's part of what makes it crappy business is if you woke up tomorrow morning, Alan, and you couldn't market or advertise or solicit, you can't even go out to somebody who hasn't come to you first and say, hey, even if you know that they're in the business or in the market for your services, you cannot go up to them. You have to wait for them to come up to you.
So the vision then is kind of expanded to a full service business law firm. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I think so. I think that there's an opportunity to support small business or business in a more meaningful way. We've got the benefit of a lot of clients that come through our funnel. I hate to say funnel, that sounds cheap, but through our firm in the last year, 95 businesses that have all kinds of needs from intellectual property to, hey, I am now getting divorced. What do I do? And they need support. And it's hard to find good lawyers. Most good lawyers are oversubscribed. Most lawyers don't care about their clients. Most lawyers they care about their billing practices, show it. They care about collections and how much money they're making. And most of them are not entrepreneurs. They've been within these business firms for so long. They have no idea what it's like to run a business and to be trying to manage a P&L while managing a team, while managing clients. Like they just don't get it. So there's no real empathy. And so I'm hoping we can expand in some other disciplines and bring that
If you can then get an accounting firm that'll do the same thing, I would love to see that. I'm going to start actually doing some stuff on how I feel like the service provider market for small business owners is just terrible, like on the law firm side and particularly on the CPA side.
Share your thoughts with me, Alan. I'm always open. I mean, we're obsessed with trying to create a better mousetrap for our clients. So
Look, the CPA industry, it's not their fault necessarily, but they're overloaded. They can't get enough people. But all they do is pay your taxes. They can't help you run your company. And I think that's where feel like service providers, the best thing they can do is give, like someone doesn't need you to go read their NDA. Like I always used to get this. They read the NDA and they have 85 comments about the IP, section. And I'm like, that is completely irrelevant to us. We're not an IP-based firm. So like actually offering advice and experience, that's a key. And I'll actually probably do some more stuff on this and like how to find good service providers. And it's so hard.
we struggle with it too. I mean, we have some good accounting firms accounting partners that we work with and the like, but I can't tell you the amount of times, Al, that I've said in the last 18 months that I want to buy an accounting firm just so I can use it, because it can be challenging at times, but that's not to, if my accountants are listening, that's not criticism.
All right. Thank you, Eric, for being on. We appreciate it. And talk to you soon.
Thanks so much, Al. Great to meet you, and I appreciate you having me on the podcast.
You've been listening to the Small Business Mentor podcast, brought to you by Alan Pence. For more insights on how to navigate your business through its black holes, visit @apence on X. Don't forget to search for Small Business Mentor in your podcast app to subscribe. Thank you for joining us, and here's to your next leap in business growth.